Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here, and today it's Tuesday, and normally on Tuesday we do tier lists, but I think that at this point we don't need any more tier lists. The next set is right around the corner. The metagame has been sort of figured out, and I think that the tier list of last week is pretty much how I still feel about the metagame right now. So today, no tier list. However, in its place, we're going to be talking about the best decks that I would be playing right now to get into Master Ball rank. This is probably a video that I think is something that I've actually been thinking about, honestly, for quite some time because, you know, we have about a week left, if not like less than a week, like 5 days left until the ranked season resets. And when the ranked season resets, you know, it's over, and then we wait for the next set to come out. We wait for the next metagame to come out, and then we go back and we hop back on the grind. However, I do think that there's still a lot of time for players to get to Master Ball rank, and I kind of think that there's actually quite a few people that haven't actually gotten there yet for a variety of reasons, likely because they maybe don't have as much time or they've been delaying that grind. However, I do think that the overall landscape right now in this last few days or so is probably really interesting and complex when it comes to maybe what decks are best to play to finally get to Master Ball rank right now. The other interesting thing about making a video like this is that, yes, of course, you would typically just think about the top decks from the, the tournament meta or the decks that people are playing in high Master Ball, and then play those decks, and you would think that those are probably the best choices to get into Master Ball rank, and maybe that is the case. But the thing is that a lot of the decks that you're going to see through Great Ball and even Ultra Ball are not always going to be Giratina, Darkrai, and Gyarados. Now, to be fair, those are definitely going to be the most common decks, and we will talk about some updated deck lists for those two decks in this video, but I think for the most part, you're going to see a large variety of deck lists. So in this video, we're talking about decks that I think are maybe surprise picks. I think that you have the element of surprise on your side, but also some counter meta picks for if you are going up against the mirror match a lot, or if you're going up against Darkrai and Giratina a lot and Gyarados a lot, maybe some other choices could be advantageous for you to play that potentially could help you get into Master Ball rank without having to play things like Gyarados and Darkrai, Giratina to get there, right? So that's the purpose of this video. Let's get right into it, guys. I think we've got 5 or 6 decks here that I think are all really interesting, and I can all make a case for why you should play them in, that Great Ball, Ultra Ball rank range to possibly, go on some nice win streaks and find your way into Master Ball. So good luck to everybody that's on that grind, but let's get right into it. The first deck, we're going to go through the obvious ones now, which are Giratina, Darkrai, and Gyarados. So the thing about Giratina and Darkrai is that we all know it's the most played deck, and we all know it's very dominant, and it's probably what most people are going to be playing, even in that Great Ball to Ultra Ball range, especially in the last few days here as everybody's really grinding that last sort of stretch, right, to get into Master Ball. However, that in mind, I think that we can kind of adjust our Giratina Darkrai deck to be a little bit different than lists that you might see in tournaments or in, high Master Ball gameplay, because again, your opponents are going to be a little bit different. So I think that as you go farther in, or higher ranks in Master Ball, you're going to see more Gyarados, but I don't expect to see that much Gyarados in like Great Ball or Ultra Ball range, so we've kind of changed around our Giratina Darkrai list to be a little bit more advantageous in the mirror match, but also in some other sort of, different matchups that we might be going up against. And this is a very interesting way to play Giratina and Darkrai. We're playing 2 Sabrinas and 2 Team Rocket Grunt, so we're not playing a Pokemon Center Lady, which is definitely really useful in the mirror matchup, and we're not playing 2 copies of Mars, which can be really good against the Meowscarada decks. We're playing 2 copies of Team Rocket Grunt and 2 copies of Sabrina. And what this does to our deck is it basically turns it into a list that can basically sort of put your opponent in really bad positions really early on. Whether you're playing the mirror matchup or you're playing Gyarados, or maybe you're just kind of playing, some random other deck that people might be playing in these lower ranks. The thing is with Team Rocket Grunt and Sabrina, you can kind of immediately put your opponent at the position to lose. So this is definitely a deck that is focused around some really hard win conditions and not so much really playing into the late game and giving yourself the best opportunities possible, as the game goes longer and longer, right? Which is why, we're not playing things like Pokemon Center Lady. We're not playing 2 copies of Mars, right? We're playing one Cyrus, 1 Leaf, 1 Mars, but we're playing 2 Sabrina and 2 Team Rocket Grunt, no Pokemon Center Lady here. So again, this is a list that I think is actually really interesting, but Team Rocket Grunt is actually kind of seeming to be maybe the best option for grinding ranked battles quickly, because like I said, it really is a card that will just force your opponent to concede. Maybe you hit a Team Rocket Grunt on turn 3 and you get rid of all of your opponent's energies, and then they just leave the game, right? So there's opportunities like that. An early Sabrina could auto win win you some games as well, or an early Sabrina, or even a late game Sabrina. Having 2 options is nice. So this is a list that's based around really hard win conditions. It might be a little bit less consistent in terms of your options. Now, we're not running red in this list, so that's one thing to keep in mind. Not running red is a little bit interesting for sure. But again, when you're playing 2 Sabrina and 2 Team Rocket Grunt, you don't really need red that much, right? Because instead of just sort of focusing around that active Pokemon, we're focused around kind of moving beyond that and then just either discarding all of our opponent's energies or just kind of moving to their bench Pokemon and KOing that Pokemon, right? With two Sabrina and 1 Cyrus. So that early pressure and that early game advantage can sometimes force your opponent to just kind of concede. And again, faster games, probably more reliable. But like I said, you're going to be going up against a lot of different decks in those earlier ranks that aren't necessarily Giratina, Darkrai, or Gyarados. So I thought this was a very, very interesting deck. But again, if I was in Great Ball or Ultra Ball rank right now, trying to get to Master Ball, this is kind of the version of Giratina, Darkrai that I would kind of consider playing. Now, again, you could cut 1 Grunt or 1 Sabrina if you wanted to play that 1 copy of Red, but I thought this was a very, very interesting list that I think is actually pretty well positioned against some of those other random decks that you're going to be going up against in the higher tiers, or the lower tiers rather, of Master Ball gameplay. Next up, quickly, let's just take a look at this differentiated, or I guess segmented version of Gyarados, which is very much about going up against Giratina, Darkrai. We have 2 copies of Red, 1 Irida, 2 Misty, 1 Sabrina, 1 Rocky Helmet, 1 Giant Cape, 1 Pokemon Communication. So I think when you're playing Gyarados right now, you really have to lean into the fact that, you know, if we draw the right cards, we're at an advantage, but if we don't draw the right cards, we're not at an advantage. So assuming that you're probably going to be going up against Giratina, Darkrai a lot in those Great Ball to Ultra Ball ranges, and you are somebody that does want to play Gyarados, I think 2 copies of Red kind of basically eliminates the need for you to worry really at all. Because if you go and you play Red and you take a KO, and then next turn your opponent's like, okay, good, they don't have Red anymore, so I can kind of just bring in my Darkrai, maybe get a 2-hit KO, maybe play Mars, maybe do some kind of crazy stuff. When you play 2 copies of Red, you really do put yourself in a position that, you know what, as long as I get my Gyarados set up, I can just play Red back to back, and you're going to lose. So this is a list that kind of really leans into that Darkrai matchup. In fact, we're seeing 2 copies of Red even more commonly in Gyarados as time goes on, because its most common opponent is Giratina, Darkrai, and I find that to be definitely very, very interesting. So 2 copies of Red is something I would recommend right now if you're looking to kind of quickly blitz through the ranks right now and do it by playing Gyarados. Again, I'm not a big fan of Gyarados, but you know, it is certainly a very strong deck, and I know some people have their consistency issues with this deck list, which is why we actually have an alternate option here in this video, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But yeah, honestly, I think 2 copies of Red, 1 less Irida kind of seems to be like the move. Like, there are some scenarios where you know, maybe you don't get your Gyarados out early enough and you really are reliant on that Manaphy not going down on turn 3. You know, having that Irida more consistently could be a good option, but realistically, we're kind of playing into that, you know, RNG aspect of Gyarados, and we're kind of just overcoming that feat of like, will I have Red this turn to take that KO? Yeah, you probably will, because we're running 2 copies of it, so this is becoming more and more popular, but I think into Darkrai and Giratina, this is actually a really, really, really strong deck. So there it is. Here is Gyarados, and I think this is the list that you should be playing if you want to play Gyarados and you want to get to Master Ball rank. Okay, so now beyond all of the very obvious options, that is, you know, Giratina, Darkrai, and of course Gyarados, let's take a look at some other decks that have been doing really well recently, but definitely can give you some, you know, high tier options. Again, just some things that I think, because the metagame is going to be so interesting in that Great Ball to Ultra Ball rank, I think there's opportunities for some non sort of meta decks to do really, really well. And I also wanted to talk about some deck lists that we haven't talked about a lot here on the channel, and some things that are maybe a little bit new. So let's go ahead and get right into it. The first one is going to be big man Blastoise. So, you know, to be fair, I'm not super high on Blastoise yet. It did place really well at the Ursa Days tournament, and that's not the reason that I'm putting it on this list. It's more of sort of a backup option. You know, we saw how that Gyarados deck maybe had changed a little bit, particularly because of that Darkrai and Giratina matchup. And a number of the decks that we're going to take a look at in this video are sort of counterplay to Giratina and Darkrai. And the main reason for that is that Blastoise does have a good matchup against Giratina Darkrai. Giratina Darkrai is a slow deck. You know, it's very consistent, it's very powerful, but it's slow, right? It's not going to do anything to you until turn 3, probably turn 4. So playing something like a Blastoise theoretically should give you an advantage in that matchup, because, you know, all we have to do really is make sure that we can evolve into Blastoise. Maybe we hit a Misty or 2, maybe Manaphy survives for a couple of turns, whatever it, you know, takes. But if we get our Blastoise set up and we're able to hit for 160 turn after turn, really, the game is kind of sealed in our favor. There's not much that our opponent can do other than maybe hit us with a Team Rocket Grunt, which again is probably why we're playing things like Team Rocket Grunt and Giratina right now. But Blastoise, technically speaking, is a really good option into Giratina Darkrai. Now, we don't have a ton of data, so that one tournament placing did show that Blastoise, of course, did pretty well against Darkrai Giratina. And theoretically speaking, it should have a good matchup, but I'm a little bit hesitant to say that Blastoise will be a top option. Maybe as you get into like the middle to late Ultra Ball ranks where you kind of are seeing mostly Giratina Darkrai, I don't know if I would really touch Blastoise until you get to that point, because this is a deck that's certainly going to struggle against some other, different types of decks, maybe things like those Skarmory decks or those Carnivine Arceus decks that are a little bit faster pace. I would maybe avoid playing Blastoise unless we kind of know and you have kind of the confirmation that the most of the time you're going to be playing Giratina and Darkrai. So kind of keep your backup Blastoise, keep it in your back pocket, ready to bust it out if you're looking to go on like a nice little win streak against a bunch of Darktina players, in that middle to late Ultra Ball rank. I do think that Blastoise is a very volatile option. I think it's a very strong option, but its matchup spreads are probably a little bit, iffy. So again, you want to be a little bit more reliant on that. The strategy here, very similar to Gyarados, right? We want to lead Manaphy, and we maybe want to buffer that Manaphy into Blastoise by having Articuno with Ice Beam to paralyze our opponent. Realistically, we just kind of want to stall out, and we kind of want to just bottle up all of those energies on Blastoise, get it set up, keep it at high HP, and then bring it in maybe with a Giant Cape. Maybe we put that cape on Manaphy to live an additional turn against Giratina Darkrai, or if we don't draw into Irida, things like that. I mean, there's certain different scenarios. If you're playing Mewtwo Giratina, or maybe if you are playing Darkrai Giratina, you put that Giant Cape on Blastoise, you get the 5 energies onto it, and then you just start swinging for 160, hopefully sweeping through your opponent, because I don't think they really have that many options when it comes to that, and hopefully they don't just nail you with a crazy Team Rocket Grunt. But yeah, again, Blastoise is a strong card. I don't know, again, how confident I am in this being like an overall top deck of the metagame, but like I said, since the metagame is really skewed right now, and if you're in that mid to late Ultra Ball range, you're probably going to see a lot of Darkrai Giratina, and I think that Blastoise is certainly going to be not only a great option against that deck, but really just a pretty decent option as sort of as opposed to Gyarados, right? If you don't want to play Gyarados. Now, this deck's also going to have its consistency problems. We're not going to just sort of, dismiss that fact. I mean, it's a stage 2, Gyarados is a stage 1, so, technically speaking, we're a little bit more safe against things like Hitmonlee, if you are seeing a lot of Hitmonlee, but we are going to have to draw into that stage 1 and stage 2 Pokemon, which, again, is less consistent than Gyarados. So keep that in mind. Hopefully it works out for those players that are looking to, counterplay Giratina Darkrai, but there's Blastoise. I wanted to just mention it because we all like Blastoise, and I do think it's actually kind of worth talking about right now. Next up is going to be kind of a surprise, and that is actually Beedrill and Meowscarada. Again, we're playing into this fact that, again, once you kind of reach into Ultra Ball, you're going to be playing Darktina. It's by far the most popular deck. I did, of course, talk a lot about Gyarados recently, but the main problem I have with Gyarados is, like, very deep into Master Ball rank, like in the top 1,000 of Master Ball. Gyarados is becoming a massive issue, but again, for all of those players that are looking to, get through Ultra Ball and maybe even Great Ball, Darkrai and Giratina is probably going to be your more significant issue. Now, how come I'm including Meowscarada and Beedrill, right? Aren't there better options for Meowscarada and Beedrill? I mean, yeah, technically speaking, and we've seen things like Meowscarada and Magnezone pop up, which, again, was really, really relevant for a while now. I, for one, don't think that Meowscarada and Magnezone is worth playing right now with how much, Gyarados and Giratina are seeing play, but also how much Mars is seeing play. In fact, I would say that right now, again, for those players that are in Great Ball and Ultra Ball range, this is probably your best Grass-type deck option, or one of your best Grass-type deck options to, again, counterplay that Darkrai and Giratina deck. So, that's going to be a big part of this video, truthfully, is like counterplaying Darktina. But my assumption is, and this is what I was really thinking about, was like, for those players that don't want to play Gyarados and don't want to play Darktina, but want to find their way into Master Ball, you're going to have to overcome those decks. You're going to have to beat Darkrai Giratina consistently, and this is one of the few decks that can do that. And again, the main reason for that is Meowscarada, Giant Capes, we've got Ericas, we've got Beedrill. This is a deck that actually does well into Darktina. It's one of the few decks that consistently does well into Darkrai Giratina. The main downside to this list is that it's going to struggle against a variety of different matchups. So again, kind of pick and choose your timing to play a deck like this. Just sort of know, like, hey, am I going to be, playing a lot of variety in these lower ranks? ranks, like, you know, maybe then I should just be playing Darkrai Giratina. But once we get into the higher ranks, and if you don't want to be playing the mirror match over and over again, playing the counter play is probably what's important. And I think that this is probably one of the stronger counter plays to Darkrai Giratina. Now, this deck list here and this archetype hasn't been doing well in tournaments the last few weeks. And I think a big reason for that is, again, it does struggle against a lot of other decks. So you got to keep that in mind. This is a very direct counterplay meta call to Giratina Darkrai. It can do really well in that matchup, but it might struggle in the other matchups. So again, just keep that in mind. But if you wanted to play Meowscarada, if you wanted to play a grass type deck, I think this is definitely a good option for you. We also do have Team Rocket Grunt. We have red. We could maybe go into Beedrill really early. That's also a win condition. So a bit of a high roll deck here, you know, and again, it's a deck that I don't think is necessarily really well positioned overall in the metagame, but it does do well against Giratina Darkrai. So we got to mention it here, and shout out to the players that are just refusing to play the mirror match. So, you know, respect to them. Next up is actually going to be Palkia. Now, Palkia, I've actually mentioned a couple of times here on the channel. It consistently is doing well, both in tournaments, both in the lower ranks of, you know, ranked gameplay, but also in Master Ball rank. Palkia is a deck that I think people just massively disrespect. The main downside to this list here, and I'm just going to go ahead and say this because it's a very simple, like, basic concept when you're playing Palkia, is that if you don't want to play Gyarados, if you're one of those people that have tried Gyarados, but you've had a lot of consistency issues, maybe you just don't draw well, maybe things just don't go your way oftentimes when you're playing Gyarados, and you think to yourself, why are so many people doing well with this deck? How are they winning games? If you're one of those people that just doesn't like Gyarados and you don't have good luck with it, try Palkia, because Palkia is a much more consistent version of Gyarados. However, I will tell you that it does struggle tremendously in the matchup against Gyarados. So again, if you're not going up against Gyarados often, but you wanted to play a Gyarados-like deck that wasn't Gyarados, this is your number one option. Palkia is really, really good. Again, with Manaphy, we can set up both a Palkia EX and an Origin Form Palkia, or we could even set up two Palkia EXs at the same time. We have Giant Cape, so there are potentials for us to just live an attack, go into a second Palkia, and then hit for 150 twice. There's always potential to do stuff like that. We have Irida. Palkia can operate as sort of an aggro card if you lead with it. We can just attack for 30. That can be good in some matchups as well. But also, we're playing Misty, so Palkia kind of operates as one of those sort of high roll, kind of like those 18 Trainer Articuno decks, where sometimes we just flip heads early on with Misties, and all of a sudden our opponent is just ready to concede because we're able to Dimensional Storm on turn 1 or turn 2. So we always have that potential, right? So this is a deck list that has really explosive potential, but also pretty decent consistent potential into the late game, with Manaphy able to set up things like Origin Form Palkia and Palkia, and that's something that's really, really scary, especially for Darkrai and Giratina players, which really don't have anything to do there for the first 3 turns. So if they allow us to set up double Palkia, it's really kind of scary for them. There's not a lot that they can do otherwise. Maybe get a little bit lucky with, you know, drawing into red and taking like a couple KOs back to back. But if we draw into Giant Cape, they can't really do that, and we can just attack turn after turn. Palkia does 150, and yes, you discard your energies, but we don't do damage to ourselves. So that's the upside of having Manaphy to set up 2 Palkia, is that we can attack, discard those energies, and even if we do discard those energies, it's not a big deal if we have a second Palkia set up, because then we can just go ahead, go into that other Palkia, and then just kind of clean up. So this is a really, really strong deck. I think its matchups into Darkrai Giratina is surprisingly good. Like I said, the only reason this Palkia deck isn't seeing that much more play is because realistically, Gyarados is probably a bit better, especially in terms of like the high-end potential, and Gyarados is better in the matchup between these two decks. So keep that in mind. But again, if you didn't want to play Gyarados and you wanted to play something that was just a little bit more consistent and less sort of RNG based, Palkia is still a really, really good option. This is one of the most underrated decks in the format right now. And like I said, hopefully you don't go up against the other Gyarados players very often. And if you don't, and like I said, hopefully you don't, this is going to be definitely a really good option for you. I love Palkia. I think this is a really good deck, and I think it's massively, massively underrated if I actually say so myself. So the last deck that we're going to take a look at today is kind of a, a fringe option. This is something that I don't necessarily feel super confident in, but again, this is for the players that want to get really spicy and maybe play something that's super counter meta and anti-meta, on their Master Ball grind here, and that's actually going to be Exeggutor. This is actually the baby Exeggutor here. The Psychic one, I believe, I forget exactly the set this came out in. Maybe it's Mythical Island. I totally forget. But but this is the small Exeggutor with the Psychic Attack. Now, this is a card that's actually really, really good if you think about it. This deck has some consistency issues, I'm not gonna lie, and we're playing Leafeon, and Leafeon's really not a great card, but the idea with this deck here is that as long as Leafeon doesn't go down, and like I said, the format is pretty slow right now with, the Manaphy setups, with Darkrai Giratina, if we can draw into those evolution Pokemon, which is a bit of an if, right? That's a big downside to this deck is its sort of consistency. But if we are able to get into Leafeon early, set up our Execute and our Exeggutor with a lot of energies, this thing for 4 energies is going to one-hit KO basically any Pokemon that's relevant in the metagame right now. It does 80 damage, and I believe it does 20 or 30 more for each energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. It is 20 more. I mean, click the card and we zoomed in there. Makes sense. Just click on it, you can zoom in. So 80 plus 20 more for each energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. So if we're going against the Darkrai with 4 energies, that's a lot. That's 160 damage. We are taking that KO. Same with Darkrai with 3 energies hitting for weakness. So same with Gyarados for 4 energies. Although, yeah, we're hitting for it's 160, so maybe not, but we have red in the deck. So keep that in mind. Exeggutor is kind of this really, really strong. It almost is an EX Pokemon. We are running the other Exeggutor so that, maybe we just have an option to go into it if need be, which, of course, Exeggutor EX is still a good card. It's just not as good against some of the other top decks in the format right now, but in some matchups, this Exeggutor is very good, especially with 2 Ericas. 2 Giant Cape as well. This Leafeon can go up to 160, keeping it out of range of getting KO'd. We can also Giant Cape the small Exeggutor, bring it to 150, and there's actually not a lot of Pokemon that can KO this card here as well with Giant Cape. So this is a strategy that is very much kind of anti-counter meta. I'm not exactly sure where this deck originally came from. I got it from my Discord, who I believe gave credit to Tilly TCG. So shout out to him if this is where this deck originated, but this is certainly a strong option, and it's not a bad deck list at all. Again, I did want to include it because it's pretty fun, and I do think it's pretty good. And again, if you wanted to surprise the meta, if you wanted to play something that just wasn't, super popular, but still have that potential to get through Ultra Ball into Master Ball, I think that this is definitely an option that can do that for you, especially considering the fact that we might be going up against Darkrai and Giratina so often. So that's really what it comes down to is, somewhere along the line in this grind, you're going to be going up against Giratina Darkrai. Like, that's going to be the deck you're going up against. It's really not until you get into high Master Ball tier where you're going to be playing a ton of Gyarados. So why not just sort of really kind of play a bunch of decks that either are, Giratina Darkrai that are set up for the mirror match, or play a bunch of decks that I think are strong against Giratina Darkrai. That's really what this video is about. I could title this deck just sort of anti-Giratina decks to play, but it's basically the same topic, but these are the best decks I think you should be playing right now to get into ranked mode. And like I said, there's other honorable mentions here. There's a lot of pretty viable decks in the format that are good. I think that the fighting decks are good with Hitmonlee and Gallade, things like that. But again, that's necessary. Those are decks that are necessarily good against, Gyarados and some other decks, but struggle against Giratina Darkrai. So basically all of the other top decks right now that I didn't include on this video, the reason I did not include them is because I don't think they have good matchups into Darkrai Giratina. And that's really kind of the topic of conversation of this video, right? Is like, what decks can we play that aren't, updated Gyarados and Darkrai Giratina that are going to help you into Master Ball? And coincidentally, those are mostly just decks that are good against Giratina Darkrai. So they're few and far between. So, there's a bit of a trade-off. There's a reason why Giratina Darkrai is the #1 deck of the format right now, is because it does have some, some bad matchups, but the cards and the decks that are good against Giratina Darkrai really aren't as strong overall. So it is sort of a trade-off. You know what I mean? Like, to be fair, my recommendation is to play Giratina Darkrai and to learn the mirror matchup very, very well. And just sort of roll with that, but I know some people just don't want to do that. So here are a bunch of options that are counter to Giratina Darkrai and hopefully help you guys get to Master Ball rank. Like I said, we've got, I think, about 4 or 5 days until the season ends. Now, my presumption here, and again, I'm just sort of presuming this is coming out on Tuesday the 22nd. The rank season should end, I believe, either on the 26th or the 27th. I'm not sure. It depends probably on where you live, but whenever the server reset is. Now, when the ranked season ends, it's probably just going to be done. It'll just be done for a while. Like, we're not going to get, there's probably going to be 2 or 3 days where there's just nothing, to be fair, maybe more. And then the next set's going to come out. A3 will likely come out. And then a day or two after that, the ranked season will start up again. So there's probably going to be like 3, 4, 5 days where there's just no ranked gameplay to play. And that's totally fine. But I'm just letting you know that it'll end and then it's going to end for sure. And then there'll be a little bit of a buffer when the new cards come out and then the next set comes out and then the next ranked season comes out. So we've got about 3, 4, 5 days, I don't know, for the ranked season. And hopefully this video was useful to you guys. Again, if you want to know sort of some like not so much like deck list tips, like if you want to know sort of some really general knowledge and sort of guidance as to some advice on, you know, playing ranked gameplay, you can go check out some of the other videos on my channel where I've played some ranked gameplay, even talked about my journey and my lessons that I learned throughout my journey to Master Ball rank. So go back and take a look at those videos if you haven't already. I would love to see everybody hit Master Ball rank. I know that it's a big time commitment, and not everybody has the time, realistically, to play, you know, 500, 600, 700 games or whatever it takes to get to Master Ball rank. So I understand that completely. But again, for those people looking to make that final push in these last few days, I want to set you guys up with great counter meta picks that I think could definitely help you in your journey. So keep that in mind, and hopefully this video was helpful for you guys. Comment down below what your thoughts are. If there's anything I missed, anything that you think would be a good counter meta pick or meta call right now for this last few days of ranked gameplay, definitely let me know down in the comment section below. I would love to hear it. And yeah, that's going to be the video, guys. We're going to wrap it up here. Like I said, today's the 22nd. It's Tuesday. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we'll probably get the teaser for A3, the next set, maybe tomorrow. I don't know. We'll have to see. I'm kind of guessing. This is totally guessing, and we're going off on a tangent now. If anybody's still watching the video at this point, which we're going to wrap up here soon, I believe that A3 will come out on April 30th, which means that tomorrow on the 23rd, probably around 9 a.m., maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, we're going to get sort of the teaser, the trailer for the next set, which I'm really excited about. But anyway, there it is, guys. Maybe, let's see. Maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't. Who knows? I mean, come on, I'm just sort of guessing out here. But anyway, yeah, let's wrap up the video. Yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe. Peace out, have a good one. And yeah, bye.